One semester I had a student cry out in class when we were discussing history philosophically. He said, all history is propaganda. And that raises an important point about how history is done, how history is used by political activists, by politicians, by people, right? How do you use or abuse or distort or shed a light on the historical past? History is a political tool. Maybe you've heard this phrase before, history is written by the winners, right? And so, you got to recognize that when you study the past, who writes the history. I've already given you one example in a previous video. What did I say? Most academic professional historians in the U.S. are left on the political spectrum, right? So you're Democrats, ideologically progressive or Marxist. Okay, so they write the history. So it's going to be from a certain point of view. Okay, it's the same thing when you study history. You're getting it from who writes the history. Why is the Civil War taught the way it is? Because the Union Army won the Civil War. What would the history books say about the Civil War if the Confederacy had won? Or if Germany had won World War I and World War II. History is written by the winners. That's how it's shaped. Is history used as a political tool to advance certain causes or ideas? For example, when you study U.S. history, you're taught that you're taught to like the government, and so anti-government things are kind of put down or mocked or set aside because you're supposed to come out of the American history classroom, liking the state, liking government. You're supposed to come out of the U.S. history classroom liking Franklin Roosevelt. Well, who writes the history? Historians that like Franklin Roosevelt. I mean, you get it's a political tool. Certain political figures are lionized and others are vilified. Why? Because of you're using history as a political tool. And what I encourage students to do is question. You should always question the history. You should always question what's going on. In fact, if you're ever told to not question something, that would be an excellent time to start questioning. That's the second you need to start questioning. If you're told not to read something, that should be the next thing you read. If you're told not to listen to a speaker or a speaker or a person, that should be the next public speaker you listen to. If somebody dismisses something, they're this or that, that should be the next person you listen to find out why you're being discouraged from listening to them. History is a political tool, political correctness. What if somebody disagrees with the majority or dominant narrative, right? Are you going to be silenced or canceled or, oh my gosh, what if the dominant narrative is false or distorted to fit a political agenda or narrative? That happens plenty, right? What happens if the dominant narrative is propaganda? What if the alternative point of view are actively silenced or censored? How do you find the truth? What if the truth is censored or called misinformation, or called names and labeled pejorative terms? When you study the past, it's important to get beyond the labels, get beyond the censorship, get beyond the political correctness. What actually happened, and see beyond what people want you to see. That's the problem with political activism in history. When political activists use history, they distort the past to serve a political end. They want you to have a certain political point of view. So they're going to distort the past or simplify it or take it out of context or just flat out be inaccurate about it because they want you to have a certain political point of view. And so you want to resist that. You want to go beyond it. And so that's how you avoid propaganda and history. I disagree with the idea that all propaganda is history, but sometimes it's used and distorted to where it is. You want to be aware of that as a student of history.